Legends regarding the Duke of Wycliffe were chilling. He didn't just bury his wives, he erased them. By the time the carriage stopped at the gates of Blackwood Manor, Lady Rosalind Cavendish was trembling less from the cold and more because her wedding dress felt like a shroud. Her father had sold her to clear a gambling debt, trading his daughter's life for 50,000 gold crowns. The world waited for the inevitable tragedy, screams in the night and a winter burial. Yet when the Duke finally walked into her chambers holding a blade that glinted in the firelight, he didn't raise it against her. What he did next didn't just save her life, it brought the entire kingdom of Ethelgard to its knees. This is the story of the sacrificed bride who became a queen in everything but name. The summons did not come on a scroll of parchment, but in the form of a bailiff standing in the foyer of Cavendish Hall. The estate, once the jewel of the southern valleys, now smelled of damp wood and desperation. Lady Rosalind Cavendish sat by the window, the needle of her embroidery hovering over a half-finished rose. She was 22, considered a spinster by the vicious standards of the Ethelgard court, and possessed of a sharp, quiet beauty that had been overlooked in favor of her younger, louder sisters. Her father, Baron Henry Cavendish, was pacing the drawing room, his face a mottled purple. "There is no other way, Rose," he spat, unable to look her in the eye. "Lord Harrington holds the notes, the interest alone. We lose the estate by Michaelmas if I do not act." "And the solution," Rosalind said, her voice steady despite the ice spreading through her chest, "is Silas Montague." The name seemed to suck the warmth from the room. Silas Montague, the Duke of Wycliffe, the Warden of the North. In the capital, they called him the Butcher, not just for his brutal efficiency in the border wars against the invading Scaldies, but for the rumors surrounding his private life. 3 duchesses in 5 years. One died of a fever, one fell from a tower, the last simply vanished, her name stricken from the family tapestry. "He requires a hostess," the Baron muttered, pouring himself a drink with shaking hands. "A wife, to manage the northern holdings. He offers a dowry that clears our debts twice over. He asked for a Cavendish, any Cavendish." "So you chose the one you could spare," Rosalind said. She set down her embroidery. She did not cry. Tears had ceased to be a weapon in this house years ago. "You leave in 2 days," her father said, finally turning his back to her. "Do not shame us." The betrayal was not the sale itself. Marriages of convenience were the bedrock of their society. The betrayal was the buyer. Her father was sending her to a slaughterhouse. That night, Rosalind packed only the essentials: her mother's prayer book, a dagger she kept strapped to her thigh beneath her petticoats, and a vial of foxglove oil. If the Butcher of Wycliffe thought he would have an easy victim, he was mistaken. She would not die screaming, she would die fighting, or she would die by her own hand. The carriage ride north took 2 weeks. The landscape shifted from the lush, rolling greens of the south to the jagged, gray crags of the Wycliffe lands. The air grew thin and bit at her skin. As they passed through the village of Oakhaven, the peasants stopped their work to watch the carriage pass. They didn't cheer. They took off their caps and held them over their chests, the way one does when a hearse drives by. Rosalind tightened her grip on the hidden dagger. Let him come, she thought. Let the monster come. Wycliffe Manor was not a house, it was a fortress carved from black granite, perched on a cliff edge overlooking a churning, angry sea. The wind howled through the battlements, a sound like dying voices. Rosalind was ushered inside by a steward named Mr. Thorne, a man with a face like crumpled parchment and eyes that revealed nothing. "His Grace is occupied with matters of state," Thorne said, his voice dry. You are to be taken to the East Wing. The wedding ceremony will take place in the chapel at midnight. It is the Wycliffe tradition." "Midnight?" Rosalind asked, her voice echoing in the cavernous stone hall. "Are there no guests?" "The Duke does not care for pageantry, my lady." She was led to a suite of rooms that were shockingly opulent. Heavy velvet drapes, a fire roaring in a hearth large enough to roast a stag, and a bed, the marriage bed, carved from dark mahogany. But the luxury felt like a gilded cage. The windows were barred with iron. The door, she noted with a sinking heart, locked from the outside. She was bathed and dressed by silent maids who refused to meet her eyes. The wedding dress was exquisite, woven of silver silk and encrusted with pearls, but it was heavy, weighing her down like armor. At 10 minutes to midnight, Mr. Thorne returned. He led her through winding corridors, past suits of armor that seemed to watch her pass. They arrived at the chapel, a cold stone chamber lit only by candles. And there he stood. Silas Montague was taller than the story suggested. He stood with his back to the altar, wearing a coat of black velvet with silver threading. When he turned, Rosalind felt the breath hitch in her throat. He was not the scarred, hideous ogre the court gossips described. He was severe, yes. His face was all sharp angles, with a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes the color of a winter storm, gray and turbulent. A jagged scar ran from his temple to his cheekbone, but it didn't disfigure him. It made him look dangerous. He didn't smile. He didn't bow. He looked at her. At her, as a general looks at a map, assessing terrain, calculating risks. "Lady Rosalind," he said. His voice was a deep baritone, rough like gravel. "Your Grace," she replied, dipping into a curtsy that was mechanically perfect. The priest, a nervous man who smelled of incense and fear, rushed through the rites. When it came time to exchange rings, Silas took her hand. His grip was warm, his skin calloused from sword work. He slid a ring of black onyx onto her finger. It felt like a shackle. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the priest squeaked. Silas didn't kiss her. He simply nodded to Thorne. "Take her to the chambers. I will join her shortly." Rosalind was marched back to her room. The maids left. The door clicked shut. She was alone. She moved to the vanity and retrieved the dagger, slipping it under the pillow. She sat on the edge of the bed, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The clock on the mantel chimed 1, then 2. Just as the silence became unbearable, the heavy oak door creaked open. Silas stepped in. He had removed his coat. He was in a white shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the corded muscle of his neck. He held a bottle of wine in one hand and 2 glasses in the other. He kicked the door shut behind him. Rosalind's hand drifted toward the pillow. "You won't need that," he said, not even looking at her as he walked to the fireplace. Rosalind froze. "I don't know what you mean." Silas turned, his gray eyes piercing her. "The dagger, Venetian steel, if I'm not mistaken, a good blade, but useless against a man wearing chainmail beneath his shirt." He poured the wine. The red liquid swirled in the crystal, looking far too much like blood. "Drink," he said, holding a glass out to her. "Is it poisoned?" she asked, her chin lifting defiantly. "Like your first wife?" Silas paused. A strange expression crossed his face, not anger, but something akin to exhaustion. He took a long sip from the glass he offered her, then held it out again. "Clean. I have no desire to kill you, Rosalind. I paid 50,000 crowns for you. That is a poor return on investment." She took the glass, her fingers brushing his. He watched her, intense and unblinking. "Why am I here, Silas?" She dropped the honorifics. "If you want an heir, take one and be done with it. If you want a victim, know that I will not go quietly." Silas set his glass down. He walked toward her, and Rosalind braced herself, her hand gripping the silk sheets. He stopped inches from her. He reached out, his hand moving toward her face. She flinched. He didn't strike. He reached past her, grabbed a heavy iron key from his pocket, and dropped it onto the mattress between them. "I don't want an heir," Silas said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more power than a shout. "And I certainly don't want a wife." "Then what?" she breathed. "I need a witness," he said, "and I need a partner who knows how to lie." The morning sun hit the gray stone of Wycliffe Manor, offering no warmth. Rosalind had not slept. She sat in a high-backed chair, still wearing her wedding dress, staring at the iron key Silas had left. He had left immediately after his cryptic statement, sleeping in the adjoining study. He hadn't touched her. He hadn't even asked her to remove the dress. At dawn, the door opened. It wasn't Silas. It was a woman Rosalind hadn't seen before. She was tall, severe, with silver hair pulled back into a tight bun. She wore the black dress of a housekeeper, but she carried herself like a duchess. "I am Mrs. Danvers," the woman said, a name that sent a chill through Rosalind, though she didn't know why. "Breakfast is served in the blue parlor. The Duke awaits you." Rosalind changed quickly into a day dress of dark blue wool. She hid the key in her bodice. When she entered the blue parlor, Silas was already there, reading a stack of dispatches. He didn't look up. "Sit," he commanded. She sat. "You said you needed a partner," she said, cutting through the silence. "Explain." Silas finally looked up. In the daylight, he looked younger, though the circles under his eyes spoke of chronic sleeplessness. "The king," Silas said, "is dying." Rosalind frowned. "King Alistair is in perfect health. The court reports say he hunts every day." "The court reports are lies written by the Queen's faction," Silas said. "The king has been poisoned, slowly. Arsenic in his wine, administered over months. He has perhaps 6 weeks left." Rosalind's blood drained from her face. This was treason. To even hear this was treason. "Why tell me?" "Because," Silas stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the crashing sea. "My former wives, they were not killed by me. They were killed because they found out what I am doing." "And what are you doing?" "I am the king's spy master. The butcher reputation, a carefully cultivated mask. It keeps people afraid. It keeps prying eyes away from Wycliffe. But the Queen, Queen Isabella, she knows I am the only one who can prove she is poisoning her husband to place her son, that sadistic brat Prince Valerian, on the throne." He turned to face her. "My first wife was a plant by the Queen. She tried to stab me in my sleep. My second, she was innocent. She found a letter she shouldn't have. The Queen's assassins got to her before I could save her. The third fled. I paid her to disappear to the colonies to keep her safe." Rosalind's mind was racing. The villain of the story was actually the hero, or was this another manipulation? "You bought me?" she said slowly. "Because my family is desperate. Because I have no political connections. Because no one would miss me if I died." "Because you are a Cavendish," Silas corrected. "Your grandfather was the finest strategist in the Royal Army. I studied his journals. You have his eyes. I wagered 50,000 crowns that you had his mind, too." He walked back to the table and slammed his hand down on a map of the kingdom. I have the antidote, Silas said. It is being synthesized in the lower labs of this castle, but I cannot leave Wycliffe. The Queen's spies are watching every exit. If I ride for the capital, I will be ambushed. I need someone above suspicion to carry the cure to the capital, someone the court views as a victim, a terrified, abused wife fleeing her monster of a husband. He looked at her, his eyes burning. I need you to run away from me, Rosalind. I need you to scream to the world that I am a beast. You must flee to the capital and beg the Queen for sanctuary. And once you are inside the palace, you must save the king. Rosalind stared at him. The key, the distance, the cruelty. It was all a play. He was asking her to walk into the lion's den, to play the role of the damsel in distress while carrying the salvation of the kingdom in her pocket. And if I refuse? She asked. Then you stay here, Silas said. You live in luxury. You will be safe, but the king will die. Valerian will take the throne, and the first thing he will do is burn the north to bring me to heel. Thousands will die. Rosalind looked at the map. She looked at the man who had been painted as a devil, now offering her a chance to be a savior. She thought of her father, who sold her. She thought of the court that mocked her. She reached into her bodice and pulled out the iron key. She slammed it onto the map. I'm going to need a faster horse, she said. For the first time, the Duke of Wycliffe smiled. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing. Then let's give them a show they won't forget, he said. Tonight, I will beat you. Rosalind gasped. With a whip made of velvet, he clarified, his eyes dancing with a sudden dark humor. We need sound effects. The servants are listening. If you were to flee tomorrow, tonight must sound like hell. The moon was strangled by thick clouds as the clock struck midnight. Inside the master suite of Wycliffe Manor, the fire had burned down to embers, but the heat in the room was suffocating. Silas held a heavy riding crop. He stood by the heavy oak wardrobe, his face a mask of grim determination. Are you ready? He whispered. Rosalind stood by the bed, her hair deliberately disheveled, her dress torn at the shoulder. By her own hand. She nodded, her hands trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the performance. Make it convincing, she whispered back. Silas raised his arm and brought the crop down hard against the leather of the armchair. Crack. Scream, he mouthed. Rosalind let out a cry, sharp and high. It wasn't hard to find the emotion. She channeled years of her father's neglect, the terror of the carriage ride, the coldness of the world. Crack. He hit the floorboards this time. Please, my lord, no more, she wailed, her voice carrying through the heavy door to the corridor, where the servants, the Queen's spies, were undoubtedly listening. Silas moved closer, his movements silent despite the violence of the noise. He grabbed a vase from the mantelpiece and shattered it against the stone hearth. The crash was deafening. You are clumsy, woman, Silas shouted, his voice booming. Useless. He was close to her now. He dropped the crop and reached out, his hands hovering over her shoulders. For a second, the mask slipped. His gray eyes were filled with a profound, aching apology. He touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she had forced out. I am sorry, he breathed, so softly only she could hear. I am so sorry you have to do this. Hit the wall again, she whispered, leaning into his touch for a fleeting second. Make them hate you. He struck the wall with his fist, a dull thud. Rosalind sobbed, a wretched sound. In the chaos of the noise, Silas pressed a small, cold object into her palm. It was a silver locket. The antidote is inside, he murmured. Concentrated wolfsbane and mithril. It must be administered directly onto the tongue. 1 drop will kill him. 3 drops will cure him. Do not mistake the dosage." 3 drops, she repeated, clutching the locket. "Now go," Silas said, his voice rising to a roar for the benefit of the listeners. "Get out of my sight before I finish you." He shoved her toward the door, hard enough to make her stumble, gentle enough to keep her steady. Rosalind threw the door open and ran. She burst into the hallway, weeping hysterically. The maid, a girl named Sarah, who Rosalind suspected sent weekly letters to the capital, was standing there, wide-eyed. "My lady," Sarah gasped, looking at Rosalind's torn dress and flushed face. "He's a monster," Rosalind screamed, pushing past her. "I won't stay. I won't let him kill me." She ran down the stone stairs, ignoring the shocked gasps of the footman. Mr. Thorne was waiting by the scullery door, true to his master's word. He held a dark cloak in the reins of a black mare that looked fast and mean. "The outcome of the game rests on you, my lady," Sir Thorne said, opening the gate. "Ride for the river. Do not stop until you see the lights of Solera." Rosalind mounted the horse. She didn't look back at the towering black silhouette of Wycliffe Manor. She kicked the mare into a gallop, disappearing into the driving rain. Behind her, in the window of the master's suite, Silas watched her go. He gripped the sill until his knuckles turned white. He had just sent the only thing he cared about into the heart of the viper's nest. The royal capital of Solara was a city of white marble and golden spires, a stark contrast to the grim gray of the north. But as Rosalind rode through the gates 3 days later, she knew the brightness was a lie. The white stone hid the darkest shadows. She looked like a wraith. Her dress was mud-stained, her hair a tangled mat, her face gaunt from exhaustion. She had ridden hard, sleeping in hedgerows, eating nothing but dried apples. She collapsed, intentionally, at the steps of the Grand Palace. The royal guards, recognizing the Cavendish crest on her saddle, rushed to her. "It's the Duchess of Wycliffe!" one shouted. "Fetch the physician!" "No," Rosalind rasped, grabbing the guard's arm with desperate strength. "The Queen! Take me to Queen Isabella! I must beg for her mercy!" The doors of the palace swung open. Queen Isabella sat in the sunroom, a space filled with exotic birds in gold cages and the scent of cloying jasmine. She was a woman of 40 who looked 30, her beauty preserved by expensive creams and a lack of conscience. She wore crimson silk, and her fingers were covered in rings. When Rosalind was brought in, supported by 2 maids, Isabella didn't look horrified. She looked delighted. "Oh, you poor, sweet child," Isabella cooed, rising gracefully. She gestured for the maids to leave. "Leave us. The Duchess needs privacy." As soon as the doors closed, Isabella's demeanor shifted. She circled Rosalind like a shark. "Look at you," Isabella said, reaching out to touch the bruise Rosalind had carefully applied with crushed berries and soot before entering the city. "The butcher has been busy." "He tried to kill me, Your Majesty," Rosalind sobbed, falling to her knees. He speaks treason. He claims the king is weak. He beats me when I try to defend the crown. I had to flee." Isabella's eyes gleamed. This was exactly what she needed, a witness, a noblewoman of high birth, destroyed by the powerful northern duke. It was the perfect pretext to strip Silas of his army and execute him. "You are safe here, Rosalind," Isabella said, pulling her to her feet. "You will testify before the High Council tomorrow. You will tell them everything he did, and then we will crush him." "I will do anything," Rosalind promised. But please, may I see His Majesty? My father always spoke so fondly of him. I feel I need the king's blessing to be safe." Isabella's face hardened slightly. "The king is indisposed. He fights a terrible fever. No one is allowed in the royal chambers." "Please," Rosalind pressed, making her voice sound small
and pathetic. "Just to pray at his bedside? I fear Silas will come for me. If I am in the king's presence, I will feel protected." Isabella studied her. She saw a broken, terrified girl. She did not see a Cavendish strategist. "Very well," Isabella sighed, briefly, "but he will not hear you. He is not woken in days." The king's chambers smelled of sickness and rotting flowers. The curtains were drawn. In the massive four-poster bed, King Alistair lay gray and wasted. His breathing was a shallow rattle. Rosalind's heart hammered. She had the locket hidden in her corset. But she wasn't alone. Standing by the bed was Prince Valerian. He was 19, with the face of an angel and the eyes of a dead fish. He was peeling an apple with a long, curved knife. "Mother said we had a guest," Valerian said, not looking up. "The runaway bride." "Your Highness," Rosalind curtsied deep. "Is it true?" Valerian asked, stepping closer. He smelled of sour wine. "Did he whip you? I want to see the marks." Rosalind froze. "Your Highness?" "Show me," Valerian smiled, pointing the knife at her shoulder. "I have a fascination with pain. I want to see Silas's handiwork." Rosalind's mind raced. If she refused, he would be suspicious. If she showed him, he would see there were no fresh wounds, only the makeup on her face. She had to gamble. "The wounds are largely internal, my prince," she said softly. "But if you wish to see the scars, I will show you. Tonight, in private." Valerian paused. His eyebrows shot up. He hadn't expected the invitation. His vanity got the better of him. He chuckled, sliding the knife into his belt. "Tonight, then," he leered. "After the trial." He turned back to the window, bored with her already. Rosalind seized the moment. With Valerian's back turned, she moved to the bedside. She pretended to kiss the king's hand. With lightning speed, she opened the locket. She pinched the king's jaw gently, just enough to part his lips. 1 drop, 2 drops, 3 drops. The liquid vanished into the king's mouth. She pulled back just as Valerian turned around. "Prayers finished?" he sneered. "Yes," Rosalind said, her hands trembling for real this time. "I have done all I can for him." She was escorted out, her heart pounding. She had done it. But now the clock was ticking. The antidote would take hours to work. In the meantime, she had promised herself to a sadist, and tomorrow she had to testify against the man she loved to a court that wanted him dead. That night, alone in her guest chambers, Rosalind waited. She held the dagger beneath her skirts. If Valerian came, she would not be the victim he expected. But Valerian didn't come. Instead, a note was slid under her door. It was written on rough parchment in a hand she recognized instantly. It was Silas's handwriting. "The wolves are circling. Do not waver." "The storm breaks at dawn." He was here. The Duke of Wycliffe had not stayed in the north. He had walked into the trap right behind her. The grand hall of the High Council was not designed for justice. It was designed for intimidation. It was a cavernous rotunda of black marble and gold leaf, the air thick with the scent of beeswax, expensive perfume, and the copper tang of bloodlust. The gallery seating, rising in tiered circles toward the domed ceiling, was packed to capacity.
Every duke, baron, and lesser noble in the kingdom of Aethelgard had gathered, their silks and velvets rustling like the wings of carrion birds. They had come to watch a titan fall. Rosalind sat in the witness box, a small, railed enclosure of polished oak that felt disturbingly like a cage. Her hands were folded in her lap, gripping her handkerchief so tightly her knuckles had turned the color of bone. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, afraid that if she looked up, the sheer weight of the malice directed at her would crush her resolve. "Bring forth the accused," the High Justiciar bellowed, his voice amplified by the acoustics of the dome. The heavy bronze doors at the far end of the hall groaned open. The sound of chains dragging across stone silenced the whispering crowd. Silas Montague, the Duke of Wycliffe, entered. He did not walk like a prisoner, despite the heavy iron shackles binding his wrists and ankles, despite the bruise blooming purple on his cheekbone and the dried blood matting the hair at his temple. He moved with the predatory grace of a wolf stalking through snow. 2 royal guards flanked him, but they looked nervous, keeping a spear's length away, as if they feared he might bite. They forced him to his knees in the center of the mosaic floor, directly beneath the throne dais. Queen Isabella sat on the high throne, resplendent in crimson silk that looked like spilled blood against the gold of the chair. A diamond tiara sat heavy on her brow. To her right sat Prince Valerian, picking dirt from his fingernails with a small jeweled dagger. He looked bored, as if the execution of the kingdom's most powerful warlord was a tedious administrative task. The king's throne, the massive seat of ancient oak and lion's fur, sat empty, a gaping void that screamed of the power vacuum the queen was desperate to fill. Silas did not bow. He did not look at the queen. He slowly turned his head and locked eyes with Rosalind. In the silence of the court, that look was a conversation. His gray eyes, usually so guarded, were burning with a terrifying intensity. "Hold the line," they said. "Do not break." Queen Isabella spoke, her voice smooth and cold, like poisoned honey. "You stand accused of high treason, of conspiring to assassinate the king, and of brutalizing your lawful wife to force her silence. How do you plead?"
Silas remained silent. He simply stared at her, a dark smile playing on his lips that made the queen flinch. "He refuses to speak," Isabella sneered, turning to the crowd. "His guilt chokes him, but we have a witness." She turned her gaze to Rosalind. "Duchess, stand and speak the truth." Rosalind stood. Her legs felt like water. The room began to spin, the faces in the gallery blurring into a single judging mask. She could feel Valerian's eyes crawling over her, dissecting her fear. "Lady Rosalind," the justiciar intoned, stepping forward with a scroll, "we have heard reports of the horrors you endured at Wycliffe Manor, the beatings, the threats, the treasonous plots hatched in the dark. The court wishes to know, is your husband a traitor to the crown?" The silence stretched. It became a physical weight pressing against Rosalind's chest. She knew the script. She was supposed to weep, to point a shaking finger at Silas, to seal his death warrant and secure her own safety as a wealthy widow. She looked at Valerian. He smirked, running the flat of his dagger against his thumb. She looked at Silas. He gave a barely perceptible nod. Rosalind took a breath that shuddered in her lungs. She thought of the cold wind of the north. She thought of the man who had handed her a key instead of a cage. She thought of the 3 drops of liquid she had placed on the tongue of a dying man. "My husband," Rosalind began, her voice small. "Speak up," Valerian barked. Rosalind lifted her chin. The Cavendish steel, buried deep under years of submission, finally surfaced. "My husband," she said, her voice ringing clear and sharp, "is a traitor." A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Isabella leaned back, a satisfied smile curling her lips. Silas bowed his head. "He is a traitor," Rosalind continued, her voice rising in volume, "to the corruption that rots this court from the inside out." The smile vanished from Isabella's face. Valerian sat up straight. "He is a traitor to lies," Rosalind shouted, gripping the railing. "He is a traitor to the assassins who creep through the palace corridors at night. And he is the only man in this god-forsaken room who has remained loyal to the true king of Ethelgard." Pandemonium erupted. The gallery exploded into shouts. "She is mad!" Isabella screamed, standing up and pointing a trembling finger at Rosalind. "The abuse has broken her mind. Seize her! Gag her!" "I am not mad," Rosalind cried out, pointing back at the Queen. "I am the courier. The abuse was a play, staged to fool you. He sent me here not to hide, but to deliver the cure you tried to keep from the king." "Kill her!" Valerian screeched, his boredom vanishing into a psychotic rage. "Guards, cut her throat before she speaks another lie." 3 members of the Queen's personal guard, men in black armor with visors down, drew
their swords and rushed the witness box. "Silas!" Rosalind screamed. The Duke of Wycliffe moved. It happened so fast the eye could barely track it. Silas didn't struggle against the chains. He twisted them. There was a sickening snap of metal, not the chains breaking, but the locking mechanism shattering. He had filed the internal pins days ago, a failsafe prepared by a master spy. With a roar that shook the dust from the rafters, Silas spun. He swung the heavy iron manacles like a flail. The heavy chain caught the first guard in the helmet, crumpling the steel like paper and sending the man flying into the front row of the gallery. The second guard lunged with a spear. Silas sidestepped. The movement flew at his water and wrapped the chain around the spear shaft, jerking the weapon from the guard's hands. He drove his elbow into the man's throat, dropping him instantly. He stood before the witness box, a wall of black velvet and violence, breathing hard, the broken chains dangling from his wrists like trophies of war. "Anyone else?" Silas growled, his voice low and vibrating with menace. The remaining guards hesitated. "Archers!" Isabella shrieked, her composure shattering completely. "Shoot him! Shoot them both!" Crossbowmen on the upper balconies leveled their weapons. Silas turned to shield Rosalind with his body, preparing to take the bolts meant for her. Boom! The sound was not a crossbow firing. It was the sound of a heavy oak staff striking the marble floor, a rhythmic, thunderous sound. Boom! 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 It came from the great doors behind the throne, the king's private entrance. "Hold!" a voice commanded. It was weak, raspy, and wheezing, but it carried the unmistakable, absolute weight of divine right. The crossbowmen lowered their weapons. The shouting died. Queen Isabella turned slowly, her face draining of color until she looked like a corpse. The doors swung open. King Alistair stood there. He looked terrible. His skin was gray, his frame gaunt, his nightshirt hanging loosely on his skeletal frame. He leaned heavily on a cane of polished ebony, but his eyes were open, they were clear, and they were fixed on his wife with the heat of a supernova. My love," Isabella stammered, stepping back until her legs hit the throne. We were told you were in a coma, that the end was near." "It was," the king rasped, limping forward. Every step looked like agony, but he refused the help of the physician hovering behind him. I was halfway down the river of death, Isabella, until the Duchess of Wycliffe pulled me back." He stopped at the edge of the dais, looking down at Silas and Rosalind. "Wolf's bane and mithril," the king said, holding up a small vial, the locket Rosalind had emptied. "My physician analyzed the residue on my lips, an antidote specifically designed for the arsenic you have been pouring into my evening wine for 6 months." A gasp of genuine horror went through the court.
Poisoning a king was not just a crime, it was a sin against God. "Lies!" Valerian shouted, his voice cracking. "It is a trick! The North is staging a coup!" "The only coup is yours, boy," Alistair spat, looking at his son with profound disappointment. "I heard you. In my fever dreams, I heard you laughing about my death. I heard you planning the execution of the Duke." The king raised his cane and pointed it at the queen. "Lord Commander," the king barked. The commander of the city watch, a man loyal to the crown above all, stepped forward, his hand on his sword. "Your Majesty, arrest Isabella of Valois and Valerian Montague for high treason, attempted regicide, and conspiracy against the realm." "No!" Valerian screamed. He looked around wildly, realizing his power had evaporated in seconds. His eyes landed on Rosalind. She was the architect of this. She was the one who had slipped through his fingers. With a howl of incoherent rage, Valerian drew his jeweled dagger and leaped from the dais. He didn't aim for his father, he aimed for Rosalind. "Die, you witch!" Rosalind flinched, bracing for the bite of steel, but the blow never landed. Silas met the prince in mid-air. He didn't use a weapon. He caught Valerian's wrist with his left hand, halting the knife inches from Rosalind's throat. The force of the stop was so abrupt that the air cracked. Silas looked into the prince's terrified eyes. "You should have checked the chains," Silas whispered. With a grimace of effort, Silas twisted. There was a wet crunching sound as the prince's wrist snapped. Valerian shrieked, the dagger clattering to the floor. Silas didn't stop. He drove his knee into Valerian's stomach, doubling him over, and then shoved him backward with such force that the prince skidded across the marble floor, coming to a stop at the king's feet. Silas stood over Rosalind, his chest heaving, his hands balled into fists. He looked at the court, at the hundreds of nobles who had come to watch him die. "If any man here," Silas roared, his voice filling the dome, "wishes to question the honor of my wife, let him step forward now. I will fight him chains or no chains." Not a soul moved. The silence was absolute. Slowly, the king looked down at his whimpering son, then up at the duke. A weary, grateful smile touched the king's lips. "I think, Lord Wycliffe," the king said softly, "that the trial is concluded." The execution of Queen Isabella had not been a spectacle, it had been a silence. There were no cheers when the axe fell, only a collective shudder that rippled through the capital of Solara. The city of gold had lost its shine. The white marble walls now seemed gray under the lingering winter clouds, and the court, once a place of frivolous laughter and deadly whispers, had become somber and efficient. It had been 30 days since the trial. 30 days since the sky fell and the earth shifted beneath the feet of every noble in Athelgard. Prince Valerian had been spared the block, a mercy granted by a father who could not bear to kill his own blood. Instead, the prince had been stripped of his titles and exiled to the monastery of St. Jude on the desolate Isle of Winds, sentenced to a life of silence and penance. King Alistair was recovering, but the poison had taken a permanent toll. He was frail, his hands shaking as he signed decrees. To ensure the stability of the realm, he had appointed a Lord Protector to head the Regency Council. That protector was Silas Montague.
Lady Rosalind Cavendish, though the court now reverently called her the Duchess of Wycliffe, sat on a stone bench in the royal gardens. The early spring frost was beginning to melt, leaving the rose bushes glistening with cold dew. She wore a gown of deep crimson velvet, heavy and warm, a stark contrast to the flimsy silks the southern ladies favored. She was watching the sun dip below the western wall when she heard the heavy, rhythmic tread of boots on the gravel path. She didn't need to turn around. Her heart knew the rhythm. Silas approached her slowly. He looked vastly different from the man in chains, and even more different from the wild butcher of the north. He was dressed in the severe black and silver formal wear of the Lord Protector. A heavy chain of office gold lay across his chest, and his hair was trimmed and combed back. He looked every inch the statesman. He looked exhausted. "The council meeting ran long," Silas said, his voice rough. He stopped a few feet away from her, maintaining a respectful, maddening distance. "The grain merchants are trying to inflate prices. I had to remind them that treason laws apply to economic sabotage as well." "Did you threaten to hang them?" Rosalind asked, a small smile touching her lips. "I merely sharpened a quill very loudly," Silas replied, the ghost of a smirk appearing before vanishing behind his stoic mask. He sighed, looking out at the horizon where the towers of the city were silhouetted against the dying light. He reached into his coat and pulled out a rolled parchment, sealed with the king's personal signet. "I have something for you," he said, extending the scroll to her. Rosalind took it. The parchment was heavy, the wax seal warm. "What is this?" "Freedom," Silas said softly. Rosalind froze. She didn't break the seal, she just looked at him, her brows knitting together. "The king feels, we feel," Silas corrected himself, "that you have been placed in an impossible position. You were sold by your father. You were married to a man you feared. You were forced to participate in a dangerous conspiracy that nearly cost you your life." He took a step closer, his gray eyes intense and heartbreakingly earnest. "That decree grants you the title of Countess of Oakhaven, in your own right. It comes with the deed to the Oakhaven estate, which is fertile and rich. It grants you an annual stipend of 10,000 crowns from the royal treasury." Silas paused, swallowing hard. "And it grants an annulment of our marriage on the grounds of non-consummation and coercion." The wind rustled the dry leaves of the rose bushes. Rosalind stared at the scroll in her hands. It was everything a woman in her position was supposed to want: independence, wealth, status, safety, a life where she answered to no man. "You are dismissing me," she said quietly. "I am liberating you," Silas insisted, his voice cracking slightly. "Rosalind, look at me. I am a creature of the dark. I am the spy master. My life is built on secrets, paranoia, and blood. I have enemies in every shadow. I cannot ask you to live that life. You deserve the sun. You deserve to be a countess in a warm valley, not a prisoner in a black fortress on a cliff." He was doing the noble thing, the heroic thing. He was setting the bird free because he believed his hands were too stained to hold it. Rosalind stood up. She let the parchment fall from her fingers. It hit the gravel with a soft thud. "You think you are saving me," she said, her voice rising. "Just like you thought you were saving me when you handed me that key and told me to run." "I did save you," Silas argued, "and now I am doing it again." "You are a fool, Silas Montague," she said, stepping into his space, forcing him to look down at her. Silas blinked, stunned. No one called the Lord Protector a fool. You think because you wear black and scare children that you are unlovable, Rosalind said, her eyes flashing with a fire that matched his own. You think because your hands have held a sword that they cannot hold a wife. She reached out and took his hands. They were large, scarred, and rough, the hands of a warrior, but they trembled slightly in her grip. I lived in the sun, Silas, at Cavendish Hall. It was bright and warm, and it was a living hell. My father looked at me and saw a debt to be paid. The court looked at me and saw a spinster to be mocked. She stepped closer, until the buttons of his coat pressed against her chest. You were the only one who looked at me and saw a partner, she said. You saw a strategist. You saw a fighter. You gave me a dagger, not a flower. You trusted me with the fate of a kingdom. I put you in danger, Silas grated out, struggling to maintain his resolve. You gave me a life worth living, Rosalind countered. Do you think I want to go to Oakhaven and embroider pillows for the rest of my days?
Think I want to be safe? She released one of his hands and reached up, tracing the jagged white scar that ran down his cheekbone. He leaned into her touch, his eyes fluttering shut for a brief second. I don't want the countyship, she said firmly. I don't want the annulment, and I certainly don't want an empty bed. Silas opened his eyes. The gray storms within them were quieting, replaced by a raw, naked hope that terrified him more than any blade. It is cold in the north, he warned, his voice a low rumble. The wind never stops howling. The winters last for 9 months. It is a hard land, Rosalind. I am not afraid of the cold, she replied, and I am not afraid of the wind. I am only afraid of a life without the man who woke me up. Silas looked at the scroll lying in the dirt, the document that would have taken her away from him forever. Then he looked back at her. The spy master, the strategist, the man who was always 10 steps ahead, finally accepted defeat. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since the day they met in the chapel. I cannot promise you safety, he whispered, his defenses crumbling. I didn't ask for safety, she answered. I asked for you. With a groan that sounded like a prayer, Silas wrapped his arms around her. He pulled her flush against him, lifting her slightly off the ground, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He held her as if she were the only solid thing in a world of smoke and mirrors. When he pulled back, his expression was fierce. Then let the court whisper. Let them plot. Let them try to come for us. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not the chaste kiss of a wedding ceremony, nor the desperate kiss of a farewell. It was a claim. It was deep, possessive, and searingly tender. It was a promise that burned brighter than the winter sun. They left the capital 3 days later. The carriage that bore the crest of the wolf did not leave in secret this time. It rolled down the main thoroughfare of Solara, flanked by 50 of Silas's personal iron guards. As they passed through the city gates, a strange thing happened. The common people, the bakers, the smiths, the farmers who had gathered for the market, did not lower their eyes in fear. They did not take off their hats in mourning. They cheered. "Hail the wolf!" a man shouted. "God bless the Duchess!" a woman cried, holding up her child to see the carriage pass. Rosalind watched through the window, stunned. "They are cheering for you, Silas." Silas sat opposite her, his hand resting possessively on her knee. He looked out at the crowd, his expression baffled. "They are cheering for the man who saved the king. Give them a year. They will hate me."
Again. I don't think so, Rosalind smiled, placing her hand over his. You are their hero now. You'll have to get used to it. I only need to be hero to one person, he grumbled, though he turned his hand to interlace his fingers with hers. The journey north took 2 weeks. As they traveled, the landscape shifted. The soft, rolling green hills of the south gave way to jagged crags and pine forests. The air grew sharp and thin. The sky turned a steel gray. Most would have found it bleak, but as the carriage crested the final ridge and the black towers of Wycliffe Manor came into view, perched defiantly against the crashing waves of the sea, Rosalind felt a surge of joy. The wind howled against the carriage windows, a wild, untamed song. "We are home," Silas said quietly, watching her face for any sign of regret. Rosalind looked at the fortress. It was no longer a prison. It was a sanctuary. It was the place where the sacrifice bride had died and the Lady of the North had been born. She turned to her husband, her eyes shining. "Yes," she said, "we are." As the carriage rolled through the iron gates, the servants were lined up. Mr. Thorne stood at the front, his parchment face cracking into a rare, genuine smile. The banner of the House of Montague snapped in the wind above the keep. Rosalind Cavendish had been chosen to die. She had been chosen to pay a debt. But in the end, she had rewritten the contract. She hadn't been sacrificed. She had been chosen, and she had chosen back. And that, my friends, is the end of the saga of the Sacrifice Bride. It's a story that reminds us that sometimes the things we are most afraid of, the cold, the darkness, the monsters, are exactly where we find our true strength. Rosalind could have taken the easy way out. She could have taken the money and the title and lived a safe, boring life in the South. But she chose the difficult path, the real path, because she knew that a life without passion isn't really living at all. If you were Rosalind, standing in that garden, would you have taken the scroll? Would you have taken the money and the freedom? Or would you have chosen the dangerous Duke? Be honest in the comments. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please give this video a massive thumbs up. It helps more than you know. Make sure you are subscribed and have that notification bell turned on. Next week, we are leaving the castles behind and heading to the high seas for a story about a pirate captain who accidentally kidnaps a princess who turns out to be a better pirate than he is. You don't want to miss it. Thank you for watching, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next story.